My name is Isabella, and if someone had told me 5 years ago that I would one day become the wife of the man whose house I cleaned, I would have laughed. Life rarely follows the plans we make. Sometimes the path that feels like the lowest point becomes the road to something beautiful. I grew up in a small village where life was simple but not easy. My father worked as a farmer, and my mother stitched clothes for the women in the neighborhood. We were not poor in love, but we were poor in money. When I was 16, my father became very sick. Medical bills slowly consumed everything we had. Eventually, I had to stop school and move to the city to work. Leaving home was the hardest thing I had ever done. The city was loud, crowded, and cold. People were always rushing somewhere, but no one seemed to notice the quiet girl carrying a small bag and a heavy heart. After days of searching for work, I found a job as a maid in a large house. The house belonged to Daniel Carter. I still remember the first time I saw it. The house was enormous, 3 floors, large windows, and a beautiful garden filled with white roses. I felt small standing in front of it. When the door opened, an older woman named Mrs. Helen greeted me. She was the house manager. "You must be the new maid," she said kindly. I nodded nervously. My job was simple: cleaning rooms, washing dishes, and helping maintain the house. The work was hard, but I was grateful. I sent most of my salary back to my family. For the first few weeks, I barely saw the owner of the house. Daniel Carter was a successful businessman who spent most of his time working. But one evening, while I was cleaning the living room, the front door opened. A tall man walked inside, loosening his tie. His dark hair was slightly messy, and his eyes looked tired. He stopped when he saw me. "You're new here," he said. His voice was calm but deep. "Yes, sir," I replied quickly. "What's your name?" "Isabella." He nodded politely. "Well, Isabella, thank you for taking care of the house." Then he walked upstairs. That short conversation stayed in my mind longer than it should have. Most wealthy people ignored workers like me, but Daniel didn't. Days turned into weeks. Sometimes he would greet me in the morning before leaving for work. Sometimes he would ask if I had eaten. These small gestures meant more than he probably realized. But in my mind, there was always a clear line between us. He was the owner of the house. I was just the maid. One rainy evening changed everything. A storm had knocked out the electricity in the house. I was in the kitchen trying to light candles when Daniel walked in. "Looks like the storm won tonight," he said with a small smile. I laughed softly. It was the first time I had laughed in front of him. "Have you eaten dinner?" he asked. I shook my head. He opened the refrigerator and sighed. "Well, it seems neither of us has." He picked up a pan and started cooking something simple, pasta with vegetables. I watched surprised. "You cook?" I asked. "Only when I have no other choice," he replied jokingly. A few minutes later, we were sitting at the kitchen table eating. It was strange. A businessman and a maid sharing dinner during a power outage. But it felt natural. We talked about simple things, our childhoods, our favorite books, and our dreams. For the first time since moving to the city, I felt like someone truly saw me. After that night, things slowly changed. Daniel started spending more evenings at home. Sometimes he would sit in the garden while I watered the plants. Sometimes he would ask about my family, and sometimes we would simply sit in silence. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the study room, I heard him arguing on the phone. His voice sounded frustrated. After he hung up, he sat quietly for a long time. I hesitated before speaking. "Are you okay, sir?" He looked up and smiled faintly. "You can call me Daniel." That moment felt like the invisible wall between us had cracked. Months passed. Our conversations grew longer. Our laughter grew easier. But deep inside, I reminded myself of the truth. This world was not mine. I was just passing through. One night, while I was preparing to leave after work, Daniel stopped me near the door. "Can we talk?" My heart suddenly beat faster. We walked into the garden. The moonlight made the white roses glow softly. He looked nervous. "I've been thinking about something for a long time," he said. I stayed silent. "When you first came here, you were just the maid of the house." His words stung slightly. But then he continued, "But now, you are the person I trust the most." My chest tightened. "You are kind, honest and stronger than anyone I know, he said.
Then he took a deep breath. I think I'm in love with you. For a moment, the world felt completely silent. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Daniel, that's impossible, I whispered. Why? He asked. Because I'm just a maid. He shook his head. You are not just anything. You are Isabella. Tears filled my eyes. I had spent so many years believing I was invisible, and now someone was looking at me like I mattered, but fear still lived in my heart. What will people say? I asked. They will say many things, he replied calmly. But they don't live our lives. Weeks passed after that conversation. We didn't rush anything. Daniel respected my doubts, but his kindness never changed. Eventually, I realized something important. Love is not about status, money, or social class. It is about the way someone makes your heart feel safe. 1 year later, Daniel Carter stood beside me in a small church. The same girl who once cleaned his house was now wearing a white wedding dress. When the priest asked if he accepted me as his wife, Daniel smiled and said proudly, I do. At that moment, I understood something beautiful. Life can begin in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the girl who enters a house as a maid leaves it as the woman who owns the man's heart. And that is how I went from maid to wife.
That night, after Daniel confessed his feelings, I couldn't sleep. My mind was full of questions. Was this really happening? How could someone like him love someone like me? The next morning, everything felt different. When I walked into the kitchen, Daniel was already there drinking coffee. For a moment, we both stayed silent. Then he smiled gently. Good morning, Isabella. His voice sounded warm, but there was also a hint of nervousness in it. Good morning. Daniel, I replied. Saying his name felt strange, but also strangely comforting. From that day, our relationship slowly began to change. Daniel never treated me like someone beneath him. Instead, he treated me like someone important in his life. Sometimes he would bring me books because he knew I loved reading. Sometimes he would ask about my dreams. One evening, while we were sitting in the garden, he asked me a question that surprised me. Isabella, if you could do anything in the world, what would you want? I thought for a moment. I would go back to school, I said quietly. I always wanted to study literature. Daniel looked at me thoughtfully. Then why don't you? I smiled sadly. Because life doesn't always give us that chance. But Daniel shook his head. Sometimes life just waits for us to be brave enough to take it. A few weeks later, he did something I never expected. He enrolled me in evening classes. When he told me, I almost cried. No one has ever believed in me like this, I said. Daniel looked at me seriously. I believe in you because you deserve to be believed in. Slowly, the girl who once felt invisible began to feel seen. But not everyone was happy about it. One afternoon, a woman named Victoria visited the house. She was elegant, confident, and clearly from Daniel's world. I overheard her speaking to him in the living room. You cannot be serious, Daniel, she said sharply. She is a maid. Her words felt like a knife in my chest. But Daniel's response surprised me. She is Isabella, he said calmly. And she deserves respect. For the first time in my life, someone defended me like that. That moment changed everything in my heart. Months later, Daniel took me to a quiet hill outside the city. The sunset painted the sky with orange and pink colors. We stood there watching the horizon. Then Daniel suddenly turned toward me. Isabella, he said softly. Yes? I don't want you to be just a part of my life. My heart started beating faster. I want you to be my future. Then he took a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring. Will you marry me? Tears filled my eyes before I could answer. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I will. The wind moved gently through the trees, as if the world itself was celebrating with us. Our wedding was not huge or extravagant, but it was beautiful. There were white flowers everywhere, and the small church was filled with soft music. As I walked down the aisle, I remembered the first day I stood at the door of Daniel's house holding a small bag. Back then, I was just a girl searching for work. Now I was walking toward the man who had changed my life. Daniel looked at me the same way he did the first time he truly saw me, with warmth, respect, and love. When we held hands at the altar, I realized something important. Love does not care about where you started. Love only cares about where two hearts are willing to go together. The girl who once cleaned the floors of that house now walked through it as Daniel's wife. But the most beautiful thing was not the house, the money, or the life we built. The most beautiful thing was knowing that someone had seen my worth when the world had not. And that is how a simple maid became the woman who owned a man's heart. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most ordinary places.